When my husband Mark and I got married 6 years ago, I thought I was joining the perfect family. The Hendersons were everything my own fractured family wasn't: tight-knit, successful, and seemingly supportive. His parents, Richard and Diane, lived in a gorgeous colonial home in an upscale neighborhood, hosted elaborate holiday gatherings, and never missed an opportunity to remind everyone how family takes care of family. Little did I know that their definition of family didn't include me, and taking care meant something entirely different than I imagined. It started small. About a year into our marriage, Richard approached us about investing in his new business venture. He needed $10,000 and promised we'd see returns within 6 months. Mark didn't hesitate. His father had built successful businesses before, and family trust ran deep. I was hesitant but wanted to support my new family. We wrote the check. 6 months came and went. When Mark gently asked about our investment, Richard brushed it off. "The business is taking longer to get off the ground than expected. Just be patient, son." Mark nodded, satisfied. I bit my tongue. 3 months later, Diane called in tears. Their roof was leaking badly, and they didn't have the $8,000 for repairs. Could we help? Again, Mark didn't hesitate. Mom and Dad would do the same for us, he assured me. I reluctantly agreed, though something didn't feel right about the wealthy Hendersons suddenly needing emergency funds. The pattern continued. A medical bill they couldn't cover. A timeshare opportunity too good to pass up. A loan for Richard's sister who was going through a divorce. Each time, the money never returned, and explanations grew thinner. Each time, Mark defended them. "They've done so much for me my whole life. This is what family does." Meanwhile, our own financial goals, buying a house, starting a college fund for our future children, kept getting pushed back. I started keeping a ledger, carefully documenting each loan and the vague promises of repayment. I wasn't planning anything yet. I just needed to see the numbers for myself. The real breaking point came when I discovered I was pregnant with twins. We were overjoyed but anxious about finances. That same week, Richard called Mark asking for $15,000 to invest in cryptocurrency, guaranteed returns. Mark walked into our bedroom that night, conflicted but leaning toward giving the money. I finally snapped. "Do you realize your parents have taken over $65,000 from us and never returned a penny?" I showed him my ledger with dates, amounts, and promised repayment dates, all missed. Mark stared at the page, silent. "That can't be right," he finally whispered. "It is," I said quietly. "And with our babies coming, we need to think about our own family now." For the first time, Mark agreed to say no to his parents. Richard was livid, implying we didn't trust him. Diane called me directly, tearfully asking what I'd done to turn their son against them. The next family dinner was tense. Richard announced they were planning an Alaskan cruise. Mark and I exchanged glances across the table. "How can you afford that?" Mark's sister asked innocently. "Didn't you just say business was struggling?" Richard laughed it off. "We always find a way to make things work." Something in me broke. "Actually," I said, calmly placing my fork down, "I know exactly how you make things work." The table went silent. Mark shot me a nervous glance, but nodded slightly. We had discussed this moment for weeks, though neither of us expected it to happen tonight. "What's that supposed to mean?" Richard's voice was light, but his eyes had narrowed. I reached into my purse and pulled out the ledger I'd meticulously maintained for the past 5 years. I'd made copies for everyone at the table: Mark's sister Jessica, her husband Tom, Mark's younger brother Kyle, and of course, Richard and Diane. "This is a complete accounting of every dollar you've borrowed from Mark and me since we got married." I slid the copies across the table. $65,300, to be exact. Not a single cent repaid. Jessica gasped as she scanned her copy. Kyle's mouth dropped open. "What is this?" Diane hissed, her perfect hostess mask slipping. "Why would you bring this up during a family dinner?" "Because we're family," I replied, resting a hand on my now visible baby bump. "And family deserves transparency, right? Isn't that what you always say?" Richard's face had turned an alarming shade of red. "This is ridiculous. We've given Mark everything. His education, connections for his job." "His education was on scholarship," I interrupted. "And he got his job through his own hard work." "We've helped you in ways you don't even realize," Diane insisted, her voice trembling. "Like what?" Mark finally spoke up. "Mom, Dad, I've looked at these numbers. They're accurate. Where has all this money gone?" The question hung in the air. Jessica and Tom exchanged glances. "Actually," Jessica said hesitantly, "you borrowed $12,000 from us last year for that emergency plumbing issue. And you still owe me for the car you convinced me to put in my name," Kyle added, his voice hardening. Richard stood up abruptly. "I will not be interrogated in my own home. You ungrateful." "Dad, we just want to understand." Mark's voice was steady. "If you're having financial problems, we can help figure something out. But we need honesty." We don't have problems. Diane snapped. Your father has some investments that are just taking time to mature. What investments? I asked. The business venture from 5 years ago? The cryptocurrency from last month? The timeshare that we apparently own part of, but have never seen any documentation for. Tom, Jessica's husband, who worked in finance, was studying the ledger carefully. These amounts and time frames. He murmured, then looked up at Richard. Have you been gambling? The look on Richard's face told us everything. Diane burst into tears. It's not gambling, Richard insisted. It's calculated risk. On what? Mark pressed. Where has our money gone? Sports betting, Diane whispered, not looking at her husband. And online poker. And those investment seminars. The room went completely silent. Richard's face crumpled, the facade of the successful businessman finally breaking. I was going to pay everyone back, he said hoarsely. Just needed one good win. Jessica stood up, gathering her things. We're leaving. Don't call us until you've gotten help. Tom followed, nodding grimly at Mark and me. Kyle pushed back from the table. I want the car transferred to my name by Monday, or I'm reporting it stolen. As they left, it was just the four of us, Mark and me across from his shattered parents. The perfect family image was completely destroyed. How could you do this? Diane spat at me. You've turned our children against us. Mark stood up and took my hand. No, Mom. Your lies did that. And this isn't just about money. It's about trust. As we walked to the door, Richard called out. If you leave now, don't expect anything from us ever again. Mark paused, turned around, and said the words I never thought I'd hear. Based on this accounting, I think you've already taken more than you'll ever give. The 3 weeks following that dinner were a hurricane of family chaos. Richard and Diane launched a full-scale campaign to salvage their reputation, calling extended family members with a twisted version of events, claiming we had ambushed them, that we were ungrateful for all they'd sacrificed, that I had manipulated Mark against his own parents. Some relatives believed them. Others called us directly, asking for our side. A few admitted they'd loaned Richard money too, never to see it again. Mark was devastated but resolute. Years of conditioning to trust his parents unconditionally were being painfully unraveled. Some nights I'd find him staring at old family photos, trying to reconcile the parents who had cheered at his little league games with the people who had systematically exploited him and his siblings. Were they always like this? He asked me one night. Or did something change? I didn't have an answer, but I held him as he grieved the loss of what he thought his family was. Jessica, Tom, and Kyle came over for dinner a week after the confrontation. We compared notes and realized the extent of Richard and Diane's deception spanned decades. They had borrowed against Kyle's inheritance from their grandparents. They had convinced Jessica to co-sign on a vacation property that didn't exist. The perfect Henderson family had been built on financial quicksand and elaborate lies. What do we do now? Kyle asked, looking younger than his 26 years. We stick together, Jessica said firmly. The four of us, 5 with Tom, and soon 7 with the twins. She smiled at my belly. We're still family, just without the toxicity. The most surprising call came from Diane's sister, my aunt-in-law Kathy. She wasn't close with the family and rarely attended gatherings. It started 30 years ago, she told us over speakerphone. Richard lost his job but couldn't admit it. He kept leaving the house every day in a suit, pretending to go to work. Started borrowing to keep up appearances. It snowballed from there. And my mother? Mark asked. Diane chose the fantasy, Kathy sighed. It was easier than facing reality. A month after the confrontation, we received a letter. Not an apology, but a notification that Richard had enrolled in Gamblers Anonymous. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Then, on a Sunday morning, as Mark and I were discussing nursery colors for the twins, our doorbell rang. Diane stood there alone, clutching a large envelope, looking 10 years older. Can I come in? She asked quietly. We sat at our kitchen table, the same one we'd bought instead of the expensive dining set we couldn't afford because of the money given to the Hendersons. I've been enabling Richard for 30 years, she said, her voice hollow. Protecting our image was more important than the truth. Even more important than you kids. She slid the envelope across the table. It's not everything, but it's a start. Inside was the deed to a small rental property they owned, signed over to Mark, Jessica, and Kyle. Worth about $40,000 of the total they owed their children. Richard doesn't know I'm doing this, she admitted. We're separating. I can't live with the lies anymore. Mark reached across the table and took his mother's hand. It wasn't forgiveness yet, but it was acknowledgement. Today, a year later, things are different. Our twins, Ellie and James, are 3 months old. Richard calls sometimes, still in recovery. Diane visits weekly, rebuilding relationships slowly. The perfect Henderson family image is gone forever, replaced by something more complicated but more authentic. Jessica, Kyle, Mark and I now have a monthly family dinner, a tradition we're reclaiming on our own terms. We talk openly about money. We help each other when needed, but with clear boundaries and repayment plans. We're learning what family really means. As for the rental property, we sold it and split the money equally, each using our share as a down payment for our future. Our portion became the twins' college fund, turning stolen potential into future opportunity. Sometimes I wonder if I did the right thing that night at dinner. Then I look at my husband, finally free from the burden of his parents' exploitation, and our babies, who will grow up in a family built on honesty rather than appearances, and I know the answer. The perfect family was never perfect, but the authentic one we're building just might be.